Hello. So sorry for starting a little bit late, but these things are always more complicated than it seems like they are. And anyway, I appreciate everybody joining. Um, there's a little bit of a lag, so I think I'm a few minutes ahead of you, or at least a few seconds ahead of you. But I'll be watching the channel. I've got David Blumenstein on the line in Skype, at least playing on my head, so he's going to help me keep up with some of the questions that you might have as well. And hopefully this will be something that's pretty fun. So we're all here to learn how to build a Roon endpoint from a Raspberry Pi. I know from the comments that some of you have purchased some parts for the Raspberry Pi. I suggested a couple of different kits, one of them based around the Raspberry Pi 3 Model A+, and another around the Raspberry Pi 4. I chose these two kits for a couple of reasons. One, that the Raspberry Pi A3 A Plus is a relatively new board. It's kind of the last of the Raspberry Pi 3 line. So it's got a little bit more, it's a little bit more future-proof than one of the older Raspberry Pi 3B models. It's very small. It's only $25 depending on where you buy it. So it makes a pretty good Wi-Fi endpoint. It's very, very simple. It's a very small board. And I'll reach down here and give you a look at the one that I've got here. You can see it's not even as big as my hand. Little bit of a thing. It does have a full-size HDMI port on it, and then it has a USB port that we can connect a DAC to. It does not have an Ethernet port, so it can't do wired Ethernet, but it does have this chip here on the corner that I've got my thumb on. That's got a picture of our Raspberry. The Raspberry Pi logo, that's with a Wi-Fi chip. So your audio will be coming in through this chip and out through the USB port. The HDMI port is something that you might use, or we might only use just for kind of diagnostic purposes. It does have an onboard DAC. You can see a 3.5 millimeter jack, but it's pretty awful. I think it's limited only to 48 kilohertz, and the clock is the same clock that the Raspberry Pi board uses for other things, so it's not a very good audio clock. I guess you could use it in a pinch if you really had to, but it's not a great choice. So we're gonna use the USB port to drive an external DAC that you already own. That wasn't part of my recommended kit, but everybody, or a lot of people, have one, and if you don't, you can get them starting at about $30 or so. On the bottom, I believe this chip here is the memory chip. Not that matters. And then this is the micro SD card slot that we're going to be shoving the card into. So the storage card that's going to include the operating system we prepare goes into this little port here. It's kind of weird that it's on the bottom, but I just thought I'd point that out in case you're not familiar with how these boards work. Anyway, so that's what I chose for, or what I recommended just for kind of long-term use. It also has 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, so if your house is equipped with 802.11 AC, for example, then you'll get that higher throughput. I've tested this board up to speeds that are enough for HD video or even 4K video. The card's not capable of it, but I've tested it with to very high throughput speeds, and it was very reliable. As long as there's a decent Wi-Fi signal, it should work pretty well. It does not have as much processing power as the Raspberry Pi 4, but generally that's not needed. Again, these output devices are super low power, so Roon core is going to be located someplace else in your house. It's going to be doing the FLAC decoding, for example, taking a FLAC stream and uncompressing it to PCM. This little board is not even tasked with that. All it has to do is read those uncompressed audio bytes from the network and copy them to the attached DAC. It doesn't have very much work to do. CPU load, I've noticed, does go up a little bit if you're playing really high bitrate files like DSD 512 or 32-bit 768 kilohertz PCM or those kind of crazy formats. But this little device should be able to keep up with those without any problem. All right, so that's kind of the introduction. What I want to do first is kind of walk you through or remind you of some of the steps that we did to get set up. So by this point, you should have downloaded all of the software that I recommended. For Mac OS, I recommended that you download first of all the Diet Pi image, Let me see if I can bring up a browser someplace so that we can walk through this together. Bear with me for a second. So dietpie.com, if you haven't done this already, while I'm just kind of running through some of the stuff, it's a good idea to go ahead and do this. So this is the longest lead time, or the longest part of the whole process. Where's our download button? There we go. If you scroll down to download and you click on Raspberry Pi, this is a Raspberry Pi, and then click download image and save that to someplace on your hard drive. You're going to need to use that later on. It's about 150 megabytes. For some people, that only takes a few seconds to download. For others, it might take longer. So if you haven't already downloaded that, definitely do. The other kind of sneaky or unusual thing that we have to do, at least on the Windows side, Strawberry. On Windows, you're going to need to have Strawberry Pearl installed. If you haven't done that already, that also takes a little bit of time. Most people are going to have a 64-bit Windows machine, so just click on the 64-bit link and download that and run through that install process. I ran through all these things in the video that I posted earlier, I think it was last weekend, to kind of walk you through the homework assignment. But if you're behind on all that, definitely go through and do all of those things. So we need the DietPi image, and we need on Windows a Perl interpreter so that we can do the installation. I'm told I've had Strawberry Pearl installed for a while. I'm told by some folks that, actually Neil out there on the stream as well, said that if you don't have Strawberry Pearl installed, or if you haven't installed it before, you'll be prompted to reboot your Windows machine before it works. So be prepared that just Windows seems to like to be rebooted whenever you do things to it, that you may have to do that. We'll also need Etcher, which is a tool for flashing the SD card. Anyway, I've got a list of all those tools on the website. If they are in the events notification, if you go to the events, let me jump over there real quick. I'm not logged into Facebook on this browser. Not prepared in this machine. Anyway, if you go to the events page, there's a list of all the applications that you download. Hopefully you've downloaded all those things. If you've not done so, go back and run through that list, either while I'm kind of rambling on about what we're doing, or afterwards, if you want to kind of run through this process again once the video's all over with. All right, so why are we doing this anyway, as an important thing to understand? I mean, you can just connect a DAC up to a laptop or a desktop computer and it'll work. Roon can function, like David Blumenstein explained during our tips talk. It can function as just a general media player, much like Audiovana or JRiver or Amara or any of these other things, MediaMonkey, other things that you might have used, iTunes, I guess, if you want to compare it to that. Roon can function as those things. So why are we going through this kind of architectural change to separate core and our outputs? Well, first of all, because Roon really didn't design, the Roon Labs folks really didn't design Roon to behave as a general purpose media player. It'll function like that, and for people who are kind of not audiophiles or don't really care, it will work okay, and it'll provide a decent user experience and kind of that all-in-one installation with Roon installed just on a laptop or desktop. But it's not optimal. Unlike some of the other audio players, Roon is unapologetically hard on the CPU and GPU of the host that it's running on. It's going to make a lot of noise. You may notice that your fans come on sometimes when you're running Roon, especially if you have the UI, because it's an OpenGL UI. There's a lot of additional processing that's going on. And if you've been a long-time computer audiophile, you know that the more busy the CPU is on the machine that is connected to your DAC, that's acting as a transport to your DAC, the more noise kind of transfers along whatever connection you have to your DAC, USB or even coax. It can transfer noise to your DAC, or it can otherwise add jitter or kind of spoil the sound of your DAC. If you've never noticed this, then consider yourself lucky, I guess. You don't have to worry about all this stuff. But for audiophiles, we care about that kind of noise, and that improvement that we get by separating core and outputs per Roon's recommendations is something that's noticeable and appreciable. But even if you don't care about that, I think taking advantage of Roon's distributed architecture and taking that to heart in your deployment in your house is going to bring you a lot more enjoyment. It will give you opportunities to explore Roon in a new way. So if once you've disciplined yourself to the point where core is separate from everything else, and then every other room in your house becomes an output, you start to see opportunities to grow and expand your Roon system in a very inexpensive way. This Raspberry Pi build that we're doing is an example of that very inexpensive way that you can add pretty reasonable or pretty good sound to just about any room in your house with a minimal expense. We're talking about a $25 or $35 computer board and a few parts and a little bit of patience on the DIY side to put everything together. Obviously, you can buy purpose-built devices that are a lot fancier than that. A lot of us like the Allo USB bridge signature. You'll see USB bridge signature. You'll see a lot of talk about that in the channel, but this is kind of an easy way for if you've got a little bit of a DIY spirit and an inexpensive way to take advantage of Roon's distributed architecture and really be able to see its power in your house. All right, so that's kind of the motivation for why we're doing this thing. Let's go back and take a look at the Raspberry Pi and the case that we're going to be putting it into. In the meantime, I'll let David monitor the channel and definitely chime in to let us know if you have completed downloading all of the different software applications that I requested that you do earlier. If you don't know what I'm talking about, mention that as well. We want to kind of get a sense of how many folks out there are ready or how many folks need more time to get the software that they need ready to follow along. And if you're just not able to, don't worry. Again, we'll post this recording and you'll be able to kind of rewind and follow along later on. All right, cool. So I'm going to get my case. This is my very fancy case here. It's in kind of a clamshell, 2 parts. You may have a different case, and if you've got a Raspberry Pi 4, you might have a very different case, but the plastic cases that I suggested, these are about $5 or so. They're not very fancy. They're not even really necessary, but you can see there's all these exposed pins and things on the card. It's kind of nice to have something wrapped around it. And usually there's only one way, unless you've got a fancy hi-fi berry case, there's only one way that these things will go in. So there's little clips that are hard to see, but I can kind of feel them with my fingers that this thing has to kind of fit around. So I'm just going to take this board, and just by looking at the ins and outs of it, I can kind of tell that I've got the orientation right. So I'm just going to kind of shove it in here. I haven't practiced this, so be patient. Make sure that everything's kind of lined up right, and then just press until it clicks. And then that's the Raspberry Pi in the case. And then the top part just snaps on top like that. And that's this is what the streamer is going to look like, this little thing right here. Nothing too complicated. You can see that the slot where I'm going to shove the SD card in is right there on the bottom. So it's still accessible even with the case on. We've got our USB port, and then we plug power into this port here. So there you go. That's the case assembly. Comment in the channel if you've got your case installed, if you're having trouble. I can maybe offer some advice. I won't be able to see what you're doing, but if you've got a specific question, let me know, or just give a thumbs up if you've successfully put your case together. Oh yeah, I mean, if it's a Raspberry Pi 4, the Raspberry Pi 4 tends to run pretty hot, so the heatsink should be self-adhesive, and it should have some kind of thermal paste on the back of it that you can press onto the Raspberry Pi 4's components. I've noticed that some Raspberry Pi 4 kits come with like 3 or 4 different heatsinks because there are several different chips in the case that you can attach them. If you want to do that later, it takes some patience and a steady hand, at least if you're OCD like I am, to get those little heatsinks lined up just right. In my experience, it doesn't matter which direction the fins are facing because there's no fan inside most of these cases. So I wouldn't worry or stress out about whether you have them 90 degrees off. And anyway, it's and all those little heatsink things are square, so you can put them on any way that you want to. But you're not going to catch your Raspberry Pi 4 on fire if you don't put the heat sinks on right now. It'll run a little bit warm, but it's not going to thermal shut down if you want to take your time and put those heat sinks on later on. For the Raspberry Pi 3, I have not been able to get it. The hottest I've been able to get it up to was about 60 degrees, and that was 60 degrees Celsius, and that was with me just stress testing the heck out of it. The Raspberry Pi 4 without any heat sinks in a case will run at 60, 65 degrees Celsius just idling. So the Raspberry Pi 4 is a much hotter device. But even then, I think you'll be fine with what we're going to do. We're not going to be putting any significant CPU load on these things with our stuff today. Just feel free to add those heat sinks later on if it's convenient, if you don't want to kind of fall behind. All right, cool. Anybody else have... you see any other questions, David, in the stream about case assembly and what to do with their physical Raspberry Pi? All right, cool. I see Simon's ready to rock and roll. We've got a lot of other folks that are chiming in that are ready, so thanks for your comments there. I can't see anybody, so it's helpful to know that you guys are out there and doing okay. All right, cool. If everybody's in a reasonably good spot with our case, let's go ahead to the first part of preparing our micro SD card. I'm going to switch over to the next application. So I suggested that you download this SD card formatter from the SD Card Foundation. It's a simple little utility. I like it because it's got some smarts about what kind of conditioning and formatting an SD card needs. At least that's my perception of how it works anyway. And it's kind of the official SD card formatter for all SD cards. So it's reliable versus trying to use your OS utilities, which may or may not work as well. This is a nice, good general purpose thing. If you do the overwrite format, it's going to take a super long time. I wouldn't do that. The only reason that's there is in case you have a card that has like your tax documents on it. You're going to try to give it to somebody or whatever, and you don't want to give away any of your secrets. The quick overwrite format is fine. I recommend using this tool even on a brand new SD card just to make sure that it's formatted properly for what we're going to try to do. Microsoft Windows, sometimes if there's been other things on the SD card, especially other boot images, Etcher may have a hard time updating the card. So Etcher sometimes gets confused about the size and partitioning of the space on the card. And the SD card formatter tool will clean up all of that stuff. So it's not strictly necessary, but for what we're doing, it's a good way to just kind of make sure that you're starting from a known state. I usually set the volume label to none. It's the default on some SD cards that you buy from the store, and I like to have it like that just so that when I put a new SD card in, I know that if it says none, that I really haven't used it for anything, that it's clean. When you click format, in Windows it may give you a warning, and on Mac it's going to ask you to confirm and put in your password to make sure that you're not doing anything. You can't see me, but I'm typing in my super duper secret password. I'll cover this again when we go through the Windows side, but on the Windows side, if you have antivirus software installed that has protection against modifying the boot block of storage devices, it may fire up and block you from doing this next step, and so we'll follow that along as well. So I got ahead of myself. That's not for this part, that's for the Etcher part. Now we know we've got a clean SD card, so we'll move on to the flashing step. For the flashing step, the software that I recommended is Etcher. And after we finish flashing, I'll let everybody kind of chime in to kind of see where we are. With Etcher, it's a pretty simple utility. I think in the homework assignment, I walked you through making sure that all these settings are set like this. It'll just save some time. I don't think we need to anonymously report things to these guys. So you can if you want. We don't want to auto mount on success because we're going to do some stuff to the card after we finish flashing it. For validate on success, I've never had one fail to validate, so this just adds extra time. We don't need the trim thing. I think auto upgrades enabled is useful, but you can turn that off if you don't. And obviously the dangerous one probably we want to leave off. So there you go. All right, so I'm going to select my image, and on mine, I have I've already unpacked the Diet Pi image using Kika. If you're on a Mac and you have Kika installed and you haven't unpacked that 7z file that you downloaded from dietpi.org, you can just double click on it and it'll unpack it into a folder, and then just use this to navigate to the folder. On a Mac, if you type what is it, Shift Command G, you can get a kind of a window where you can navigate to the path if you know where you put it. I recommend putting everything on the desktop just to make it easier to find. So navigate to that folder wherever you've got it downloaded, and wherever you've unpacked that 7z file, and you should see the hash.txt, a readme.md, and the DietPi image. We can only see the DietPi image. Everything else is grayed out because Etcher only understands what to do with this kind of file. Should be a little over a gigabyte in size, and that's what we're going to be writing to our SD card. Now, this is different from just dragging and dropping this 1 gigabyte file to our SD card. This process is kind of a lower level than that. It's going to be reading the contents of this image and then kind of doing a bit-for-bit copy of the contents of this image, including the boot block, to the SD card so that the SD card would be bootable. If you just use Finder or Microsoft Windows Explorer and drag and drop this image file to the SD card, you will not be able to boot your Pi. It won't do anything useful. So you have to use a tool like Etcher to flash, and this is what we call this flashing. You have to flash this image to the SD card to make it be bootable. So I'm going to click open here. I should note that it's important to make sure that we have the correct device. I know that the SD card that I've got in my little SD card reader is about 32 gigs in size, so that's the correct. I know that that's the correct one. It's a good idea to kind of confirm this size. If you've got multiple thumb drives or other removable media in your computer, you don't want to flash the wrong one. So pay attention to this. I think you can click change, and it may give you a list of different removable media that you have in your system. I don't want anybody to be mad at me because you wiped away your family's photos or whatever, or your entire music collection that's on a thumb drive or whatever. Just pay careful attention to this and make sure that you're choosing the right one. If you're not sure, eject that SD card, see what disappears from this list, and then put it back in and see what shows up again. Just be very, very careful to make sure that you're paying attention to that and that you choose the right one. So if we've got the right image and we've got the right media, we click the flash button and we wait a few minutes. In my case, it's going to ask me for a password. On Windows, I think it'll just give you kind of that pop-up to ask you if you're sure. It's at this point on Windows that if you have antivirus or malware protection software, you may get a warning that says that it's going to block your write, and you may have to whitelist the Etcher software in your antivirus software to make this work. I'll show when we get to the Windows side of things what that looks like and what I had to do on my side. But absolute worst case, you could temporarily disable your antivirus software for a few minutes if you have to, but just remember to enable it again when you're done. But antivirus, a lot of popular antivirus software attacks your machine by modifying the boot block, and it hides its malicious code inside of that boot block so that you never know that it's installed. And so this is why most antivirus software has this boot block modification protection. But in our case, we're intentionally modifying the boot block of this SD card. If we don't, then our Raspberry Pi can't boot from it. So it's one rare case where this kind of thing's acceptable. Anyway, hopefully this process goes about as quickly for you as it did for me. And Etcher seems to be happy. I'll pause right now to see if there are any questions. Has everybody left? Maybe go get a beer or coffee, or gotta hit your Balmer Peak to press forward. Maybe give me a thumbs up or an I'm good if you are good with your SD card flashing. And definitely raise your hand, type something in the questions if for some reason your card didn't flash for some reason or you got stuck. I see Antonio's at 35%. Oh yeah, I'm using a USB 3 card reader writer thing. If you have a USB 2 one, it might take a bit longer. But if you've ever done Rope or some of these other images that are much larger, they take a lot longer. The Raspberry Pi image is Diet Pi image is kind of nice because it's one of the smallest ones out there. It generally goes pretty quick, but depends on the speed of your card reader writer and which card you're using. It's like Neil's got a beer, so that's helpful. It's not quite beer o'clock here yet, but getting there. Yeah, so after Etcher finishes flashing your card, it's going to show back up with a volume label of boot. That's totally fine. In fact, that's why I use none instead of boot as my volume label, so that I can know if the SD card's good or not. Yeah, Simon, I've got a generic USB-C adapter as well. Actually, I've got a 7-port hub that's got all these cameras and other junk plugged into it, plus the SD card reader writer. And then, yeah, it's hard to find SD card reader writers that are USB-C. So, but if you're USB-C to USB, you should be in pretty good shape. All right, Antonio is rocking and rolling here, successful. If anybody having any problems? Everybody else might just be watching along and then planning to do this afterwards, and that's fine as well. But if you're doing this live and you're having problems, let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next step. The next step is exciting. All right, let's do this then. Let's go on to the next step. The next step is where we're... Oh, how sloppy of me. Let me clear this up here real quick. I was doing math. The next step is going to look a little frightening to folks who don't use computers a lot or that are not programmers or whatever by trade. We're going to use a kind of command prompt or terminal window. So on Mac, if you use Spotlight, command space, and then type in terminal, you should be able to get a terminal window. On Windows, it's going to be, you're going to do type the Windows key and then type CMD, and that should bring up a DOS prompt. I'm going to run through the Windows thing a little bit later, but you're going to get something that looks kind of like this, and it's something you can type things into, just a little black window typically. Don't be intimidated by this. It's not a GUI type of thing that we're doing, but I think you'll find that it's not too complicated. We do have to do a little bit of manual configuration, and I'm going to explain why here. So on the Mac, the Raspberry Pi or the SD card, after Etcher finishes formatting, is going to show up under /volume/boot. On Windows, it's going to be a drive letter, so it might be like drive letter E. When we run through the Windows side of things, you'll be able to see when we pull up SD card formatter, it's going to show what drive letter your SD card is in. You'll need to make a note of that so that you can type CD space E:, for example, or whatever to get to the right. Or I guess you just type E:, right, to get to drive letter E, or D:, to get to drive letter D, and you'll be able to get to there. Yeah, Neil's reminding us that the terminal's under the utilities folder under applications. If you don't have Spotlight enabled, you can open the terminal that way. Any modern sort of Mac OS 10.10 or later should have this in an easy to install, easy to find place. So on the Mac, we're going to use a command called ls, which is list files, and -l tells us that we're going to do a long listing to see all the files that are here. Yeah, Neil says that Etcher unmounts it. If you didn't uncheck that box that I showed you on the config for Etcher to leave the SD card mounted, then you'll have to pop it out and shove it back in again for your OS to find it. But that's why I recommended that you just tell Etcher not to eject the card after we finish flashing. So there's a whole bunch of files here that we got. What I'm going to do is have you type more, which is a command that everybody should have. Actually, this won't work on Windows. Let me just show you in another editor so that I can just show you what this dietpy config file looks like. So there's this dietpy.txt file that's at the top that has a whole bunch of configuration parameters. And if you want your if you want to kind of pre-configure your boot image to come up on your Wi-Fi network with the right settings, then it involves editing this text file. But editing that text file is kind of a pain in the butt, and it's difficult to do reliably and repeatedly. So I wrote a little Perl script to make that whole process a bit easier. So what I want you to do is open a browser window and go to setup. Go to this address. Hopefully you can see that. It's ws as in sam-e.com/dietpy-setup. And if your system asks you where to download it to, save it to that SD card. So save it to /boot or to that boot folder on macOS or to whatever drive letter the SD card is mounted to on Windows. If it doesn't ask you, it was probably going to save this little file to your downloads folder, and you'll need to use Finder or Windows File Explorer to copy that file and drag it over to where your SD card is. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but if you've got questions, ask in the channel. Another option, if you don't want to do the browser thing, Windows and Mac both have this little curl command line utility. You type curl -capital L lowercase o dietpy-setup and then that web address ws-e.com/dietpy-setup. This will go out to the web and slurp down that setup script that I'm talking about. And since I'm sitting, my working directory is /volume/boot. I can check and see that I have this dietpy setup script downloaded here. So comment in the channel if you had trouble finding this script or pulling it down, or give us a smiley face or thumbs up or something. Yeah, Antonio, David has put that command line in the chat. That curl command should exist on any Windows 10 installation that's newer than about 2008, and it's been part of macOS for a long, long time. All right, thanks for your comments. Helpful for me to know that things are working okay for you guys. And then the next thing I'll have you do is type Perl, not P-E-A-R-L. That's like the thing that you use for jewelry. It's Perl, P-E-R-L, P-E-R-L space -V. This just helps us make sure that you've got Perl installed on your system and that we can find it okay. If we're able to get output similar to what I'm showing there, then you have the Perl thing that you need to the Perl application that you need to run this script. Perl comes for free, pre-installed on macOS, so no concerns there. On Windows, this is why I had you install that Strawberry Perl and possibly a reboot to get it up and running. Yes, Tim, the dietpy setup should not have a file extension. It's not going to have a file extension because we're going to use this Perl interpreter to run it. We're not going to open it like in Explorer or anything. And I'll show you how in just a second. But that's a good question. Thanks for asking. All right, anybody having trouble with the Perl-V thing? Comment in the channel if you're having trouble. Otherwise, we are going to move on to the next exciting part of this whole thing. All right, here we go. Here we go. So we're going to type Perl dietpy setup. So this is going to fire up that Perl interpreter, and it's going to give dietpy setup the program that Perl should interpret and run for us. And all this Perl script is going to do, all this program is going to do is make some edits. It's going to ask us some questions, and then it's going to make some edits to that dietpy.txt file and the dietpy-wifi.txt file. You could make these edits in Notepad or text edit yourself manually, and I'll show you what changes it's making. But it's a lot easier, I've found anyway, to from a consistency perspective, to have these files edited automatically. Just it's less error prone than me walking you through a text edit session with you modifying 15 lines in here to get everything set up right. So that's why if it doesn't work, editing the text file by hand is a fallback position you could do. The other reason that I found this script to be helpful is if you've got like 5 different Raspberry Pis in your house and you want to reflash them for some reason, you can do it with a great deal of consistency using a script, while editing them by hand is kind of a pain. All right, so when we run this thing, this is what you should see. This is going to edit dietpy.txt for your home network, and it gives you instructions about what to do with each of the prompts below. You have to give it's a good idea to give your Raspberry Pi a name. I think by default it's called dietpy, but if you have 6 of these things in your house and they're all called dietpy, that's kind of confusing. I'm just going to call this one Roon. Which one am I building? I guess I'm building the Raspberry Pi 3. So RPI 3A, maybe. We'll just call it that, just so that I know what it is. You can call it anything you want. No spaces allowed in the names. You're only allowed to put letters, numbers, and dashes. No underscores either. I wouldn't make the name too long. Try to, keep it down to, 8 or 10 characters at most. And it can't start with a dash. I don't think anybody would do that, but it's got to kind of match this file format. And next, it's going to ask if you have a Wi-Fi network. But before I go on, how are we looking? Anybody having trouble with this part? Tim, looking good? Neil? Antonio? It's quiet in the channel. Now, if you're building the wired version, if you've got a Raspberry Pi 4 and you have an Ethernet cable sitting next to you, and that's how you plan to use your Raspberry Pi 4 output with just a network cable plugged in, then say no when you get to the Wi-Fi network part. You're just going to run it as Ethernet. We're not going to bother with Wi-Fi. That'll be more reliable typically. It's a nice way to go. If you have a network connection next to your audio system or where you're going to be using this thing, just say no here. We can always run through this process again later on and switch it to Wi-Fi if for some reason you decided to do that. So don't worry about like committing permanently. This isn't a lifetime choice or whatever. But if you have a Raspberry Pi 4 and you've got a network cable right next to you and that's what you're going to be using today, you can say no here, and that simplifies things quite a bit. If you do have a Wi-Fi network, then I want you to say yes here. Since I'm doing the Raspberry Pi 3A, it has no network port, so we're going to have to say yes. Now you're going to need to know, I think I mentioned this in the instructions earlier on, you're going to need to know what your home networks, hang on, Tim's got a question here. You should hang on a second. Trying to remember what a DOS prompt looks like. E:, that will get you to the E drive where your SD, then type Perl. All right. I think good question. Thanks for asking. So it's important that the dietpy setup script is copied to you wherever your SD card is, and then maybe it wasn't really clear on the Windows side, but again, we'll go through this in the Windows side. It's important that your what we call current working directory is that drive. So you should be able to type, for example, if you're on DOS, you should be able to type dir. Can't do that here, but you should be able to type dir and get an output that looks something like this. If you don't, then you're not kind of in the right place. And if you try to run Diet Pi set up from the wrong directory, it'll yell at you and tell you that you need to go to this directory, because it has to be able to find that dietpi.txt file. All right, so yeah, so Tim, this dietpi setup is going to edit the dietpi.txt and dietpi-wifi.txt files. All right, so I'm going to give it this name again. We're going to call it Roon RPI3A. And I'm going to say that I do have a Wi-Fi network. So if you don't know what your Wi-Fi SSID is, hopefully you can easily figure that out and catch up with me later. It's usually something you can look in your Windows or your system settings to see. If you've ever connected up a smartphone or a Nest camera or anything to your network, you have to know these things. I've set up one specifically for audiophile friends that come over, so I don't mind sharing it here. It's audio files on mine. You're going to put in whatever's on yours. Don't type this unless you're in my house, in which case I'm scared. And then you're putting your super secret password. I put in Roon Rocks for mine, but you're not going to put this in. You're going to put in what your super secret Wi-Fi password is. And that's what you'll use settings specific to your particular Wi-Fi environment. Again, if you don't know what those are, I'll give you another homework assignment to go and find those. It's very important that you get this stuff correct. There's no kind of verification. If for some reason you get this wrong, your Raspberry Pi will not show up on your network. And what you do is just power it off, pull the flash card out, reflash it with Etcher, and then run the script again and try again. That's kind of your recourse. If anything goes wrong in any part of this, you just reflash. Reflashing is not a big deal. You can do it 1,000 times or more on these cards without wearing them out, so don't worry about that. Once you type in the information, you can see what it's going to tell you, what changes it made to the configuration file. So it's modified this parameter called auto setup net hostname. That's the name. It should have, I've written some code in there that tries to guess what your time zone is. Hopefully that worked okay. Other parameters that you might care about. That's pretty much it. We're configuring the sound card to be the USB DAC in the audio settings for this thing. By default, DietPi doesn't come configured that way, but since we're going to be using this for Roon, we want to. We're also telling DietPi during the first boot to go ahead and install these software applications. These numbers aren't going to be meaningful to you, but I'll tell you that number 5 is the ALSA. It's an audio. What does ALSA stand for? It's Linux's audio tools. It's useful to have those installed. And then 121 is Roon Bridge, which is what's going to make your DAC visible to Roon after it boots up. You pretty much don't have to worry about the other parameters. I think that I make a guess at what country you're in. I think I just leave US keyboard. I just changed the US keyboard layout to US. I don't think that'll matter. You're not going to have, most people are never going to connect a keyboard to this thing. So it shouldn't matter. By default, when DietPi image is released, most of these settings are British or UK settings, and so I've just made them a little bit more friendly for folks in the US and other countries. It will hopefully work out. What's really important here for making sure that your Wi-Fi works okay is that we have the time zone right. There are different countries have different kind of laws around what frequencies can be broadcast by consumer electronic devices. And there's different parts of the audio spectrum that are assigned to different manufacturers and for different uses. And so the DietPi software uses the time zone to kind of work out which regulations and which frequency bands apply to wherever you happen to live. So, Neil, thanks. ALSA is Advanced Linux Sound Architecture. Anyway, it's useful to have that installed. Thank you, Neil, for helping me remember what that is. So the time zone part is pretty important. If that looks wrong, please comment in the channel. I can walk you through how to fix that. I did my best to try to have the script guess where you are, but this is not a perfect science. And then dietpy-wifi.text is just going to have your Wi-Fi key, and we choose. I'm assuming that everybody's using at least WPA on their Wi-Fi network. If you're using WEP or something like that, raise your hand and let me know as well. If you don't know, you're probably using WPA. I think WPA has been the standard for at least the last decade. And then make sure that your Wi-Fi SSID is spelled right. AUDIO, that one looks right for me. Make sure that yours is spelled right as well. This whole thing is very persnickety. Computers get fussy if things aren't spelled exactly right. All right, any comments, any questions? Did everybody get this far? Did the script bomb out? I haven't tried this everywhere in the world, so it wouldn't surprise me if it crashes for somebody, but hopefully not. It's all quiet. Tim, feeling good? Antonio, have we lost you? Are you still there? How do we feel? All right. Simon says we're good. If Simon's happy, I'm happy. Simon says we can move on, so we're going to move on. Thanks, everybody. All right. Again, there's nothing magic about what's happened here. Literally, we've just made these changes to that script, or to that file, the dietpy.txt file. You can go and look in the dietpy text file and see what changes we made if you want. It's all there, and you could have manually edited the file and put all these parameters in yourself if for some reason you didn't have this script. But I like the script. It's just it makes things a little bit easier. All right, cool. So we're back to our lonely little Raspberry Pi 3. Before we do anything rash, make sure that you eject the card cleanly using whatever mechanism your operating system likes to use. On Mac, you can drag the little boot thing from your desktop to the trash can. It's always disturbing to me. It seems like you're throwing it away, but that's how you eject it. Or you can open up Finder. Under Locations, you may see Boot, and then this little arrow with a line underneath it. You can click on that to eject it. On Windows, you might get a message saying, I just did right now, saying the disk boot could not be ejected because your terminal window is using it. So I'm glad that happened for me, because it might have happened for you. To stop that, you can type exit, or you can just type CD to get out of the to remove the terminal window from the root volume of your SD card. CD will get you out, or you can just type exit to get out of your terminal window. And then when you click eject, it should eject it for you. It's not actually going to spit it across the room, but it will. It'll safely kind of dismount the card. It's important to do that because some operating systems will store writes in memory and then delay flushing them to the actual physical media until a certain amount of time has passed or a certain amount of data has been written. This just makes things go faster. Unfortunately, if you pull the physical card out before the operating system has actually emptied all those buffers, memory buffers, and made that card consistent, then you can end up with a card that is missing data or corrupt or whatever. So unmounting it cleanly, make sure that the modifications that we did to the dietpy.txt file, to the dietpy-wifi.txt file, are actually written to the physical media. So now I'm going to reach over here and unplug it from my little card reader thing. I cannot believe how small these things are. It's crazy. Let me switch my camera over to our little lonely Pi there. And so there it is. And you should be able to now just shove it into your Pi hole, I guess. Again, the orientation of this is a little bit weird. The label, if you can see this here, is going to be facing, it's going to go in kind of upside down. So the little pins on the micro SD card are going to face the motherboard of the Pi. So I'm kind of holding the Pi upside down since the SD card is on the bottom. The pins are going to be kind of facing the motherboard, not like this, but like this. All right, so I'm going to slide that thing in there. If you feel resistance or it doesn't slide in all the way, then don't force it. You will break it, I promise. Take it out and try flipping it around the other way, but that's the orientation that we want for this thing. And that's kind of the whole thing assembled. For the next exciting part, we're going to need to see if we can get this thing to boot up. For that, I've got to... The way most of you will do this is just by connecting power to this thing and then waiting for it to come online. I'm actually going to attempt to connect a monitor to it with an HDMI cable, and then we'll watch mine boot and do all of its things. I'm hoping that the timing of mine lines up pretty well with the timing of yours, and we'll be able to kind of help us kind of stay together timing wise. This part is kind of the most time consuming part. So I've got my HDMI full-size monster HDMI cable connected to this thing, and I'm now going to get my power. You remember I have this sort of very brightly colored micro USB cable in this crappy old Apple iPod charger thing. So I'm going to plug that in. I'm going to... These things have a certain orientation. I've got to make sure the long side is lined up to the long side. And plug that in. And now for the exciting part, I'm going to connect power here. Now, I'm going to try to see if we can see anything. All right, so there's the little monitor. Right now, what it's doing is it's going to be resizing the image. The DietPi image is written so that it can accommodate a 2 GB micro SD card, if I remember right. But when it boots up the first time, it takes a look to see what the actual size of your SD card is. And then it expands that kind of file system to use all the space available on the card. So I've got a 32 GB SD card. It's going to say, okay, I've got more than 2 GB of space I can use, so I'm going to expand the file system out to use all of that. And then it's going to try to see if it can configure the network. And then it's going to install some updates. It's just like anything else. If you do a fresh install of Mac OS or Windows or Linux or anything at all, you're going to have to install updates. And so there are going to be updates that have been released since the time that you downloaded this image. If you're not, if you don't have a display connected, then you can just watch mine and kind of see what's going on. Some parts take a fair bit of time. But this whole process typically, I know on my Wi-Fi signal up here in my listening room is intentionally very weak. It's adequate for my remote control for Roon, but not so high that it messes up anything else, which makes this room not maybe the best room for demoing this kind of thing, but I'm hoping that yours goes at least as fast as mine does, since mine may be a relative worst case. Wi-Fi signal is going to be a limiting factor on how quickly we're able to download these things. When we get to the Raspberry Pi 4 with an Ethernet connection, you'll see that this whole process goes a lot quicker, not only because the Raspberry Pi 4's processor is faster, but also because, and principally because we've got a good network connection. And then for those of you following along at home, if you don't have your Raspberry Pi connected up to an external monitor or to a TV via an HDMI cable or anything else that you can use to watch that, it's okay. You should, though, after you've connected power, see at least... Oh, right. Yeah, I'm going to cover the Windows. We're going to do the Windows side here in a bit. David mentioned that some of you may have some questions about installing Perl on the Windows side, so I've got it installed already in my system because I did my homework, but if you haven't, I'll run through it again just so that you can kind of see what that looks like. So you should so if you ran the SD card formatter software that I recommended in the earlier step, it will format the card correctly. and then if you ran Etcher to flash the car, then it will flash the image correctly. So when you say it's no bueno so far, what is your indication that it's not good? Are you watching the Raspberry Pi from a monitor, or are you looking at some red lights, or what are the symptoms, I guess? Help us understand what you're seeing. Yeah, you should just see flashing lights blinking if you don't have a monitor connected. That's okay. If you don't see any lights on the Pi, and I mean, it may depend on your case whether you're able to see the lights on the Raspberry Pi, but if you're able to, if you're not able to, if you're able to see lights flashing, that is a very good sign. That means it's working. If the lights are just solid, that's not a good sign. All right, Tim, caught up now means good. Sounds good. If you if let us know kind of where you are if you're still behind. Simon says no output on a monitor. Seems stuck after just a few lines. Simon, that's kind of weird. I would try reflashing again. Are you using a Raspberry Pi 3? Which Raspberry Pi are you using? The 3 Model A Plus, the Raspberry Pi 4, or something else? Ah, Bright Pi 2. It could be that the Raspberry Pi image that I had everybody download, it's called Buster, I think. Maybe that doesn't work on a Raspberry Pi 2. It could be that only Stretch works on a Raspberry Pi 2. It could be that the Raspberry Pi is too old. Let me do a quick Google search and see if that's the problem. That's my only guess, is that the Raspberry Pi image doesn't support I thought it would. I'm not surprised that it doesn't. Let me see if they list which Raspberry Pi models the latest version supports. Buster is the current one. I don't see any mention of them dropping support for older Raspberry Pi, so that's kind of weird. It says all models. Maybe just try, I think it should work. I wish I had a Raspberry Pi 2 to test. Maybe just try reflashing, running Diet Pi setup again and rebooting. If that doesn't work, maybe just try reflashing and not running Diet Pi setup. I don't think there's anything that it does that could be harmful, but that's another thing to try. The other thing to do would be to re-download the Diet Pi image from dietpi.com. Maybe something got messed up when you did the download, and so the file's maybe not quite healthy or something. Absolute worst case, you might have to go out and buy a Raspberry Pi 3. Yeah, that's all I can kind of suggest. Mine looks like it has finished its boot up process. If it finishes, on here we can see that it shows what IP address the Raspberry Pi has. That's kind of useful for diagnostic information. I'll show you some ways to find that address if you don't have a monitor connected, but Roon will be able to find it as well. The IP address will be specific to your network, and it's not going to be, and specific to a device, it's not going to be the same as mine. But if you had a monitor connected and you get to the stage that you see on the screen right now, that means that that the Pi is up and alive and all the software is installed and updated and it's ready for Roon to discover it. Tanio says steady, light steady, yellow light flashing. All right, good, good, good. All right, how do we know that this thing is alive? I guess that's the question. Let me show you what, show you an application. Oh, wait, I don't have the right adapter. Never mind. There's an application that you could, while you're waiting for yours to come online, there's an application on Windows and on iOS called Fing, F-I-N-G. Probably should have had you install this as part of the homework assignment if you wanted to troubleshoot, but F-I-N-G, and it will scan all the devices on your Wi-Fi network, and it will let you know if it sees any Raspberry Pi devices there. And that can be useful to, if your Raspberry Pi shows up with an IP address there, that's a kind of good way to know that it worked. Another thing you could do if you're able to log into your home's Wi-Fi router or your Wi-Fi network configuration panel, and it lists all the devices that are on your Wi-Fi network, you can find your Raspberry Pi there. It's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm going to be showing, but those are kind of a couple of different ways to find your Raspberry Pi's address if you wanted to just see if it showed up on the network or not. But we'll move on for now. I'm going to, is anybody else, we'll see it. Jose says it feels like it's done. Let's just go and see if we can find this thing in Roon. Now, before we actually let me switch back for a second. Before we try to discover this thing in Roon, Roon's not going to be able to spot this thing right now because Roon can't just play to a Raspberry Pi with no DAC attached. And we have told the Raspberry Pi that it's going to be using a USB DAC. We don't have a USB DAC connected, so Roon's like, I don't, what do you want me to do with this thing? There's a thing out there that's running Roon Bridge, but I can't do anything with it. I can't help you. So, so let's go and let me show you. I'm going to switch back to this screen so that I can show you attaching a DAC. So I've got a little USB DAC here. This DAC is kind of handy because it happens to be battery powered, so it's not going to draw too much current from the Raspberry Pi. As long as I switch it on first, I've got the little green light. So the DAC is running under its own horsepower, I guess, if you want to call it that. Let me grab a USB cable. So connect USB cable here, and we're going to connect a USB cable to the DAC, or to the Raspberry Pi. So if you can make any sense of all these red cables that I have, the DAC is connected to the Raspberry Pi, and the light on the DAC changed colors. Sometimes that you'll get that, and that's helpful or not, I guess. But that will help Roon be able to find this thing. So let's go take a look at Roon and see if we can find this. All right. So if you're in Roon, normally it's going to look something like this. We're going to go to the Setup menu, Settings, and then we're going to go down to Audio. And I have a lot of things on my network, so don't worry about this. I know that what did we call this thing? We called this thing, I don't see it here yet, actually. Oh, here we go, down here. I just have so much junk to scroll through. See where it says, it's really small on your screen, I know. It says Roon-RPI3A. That's the name that I gave this thing. And if I went back to that previous screen where I was showing the video display, I would see this IP address. So that matches. This is the new thing that I have. Mine's already got a name because, well, this is the name that that Roon assigned because it detected this from the USB driver that it saw there. So let's go ahead and edit this thing. I'm gonna wipe out this name. If you have a device that's supported by Roon, you could pick it from here. For example, if you had a an AudioQuest Dragonfly or whatever, you could choose that or whatever. But I'm just gonna manually configure everything. So I'm not gonna go into a ton of detail about what settings you need, but I know that this one supports DSD native and some of these other things make sense. I would recommend that if you're not going to be using Roon to control the volume, if you've got like a preamp or analog preamp or something downstream, or maybe your DAC has a volume control, like mine's got a little volume control knob that you use fixed volume here, but otherwise you can kind of take the defaults. I'm going to change the name. I was messing around with this earlier, and I had a different DAC attached. I'm going to call this Loft Hi-Fi DAC or something like that. I usually put the name of the room that this thing is in into the name that it shows up in Roon, just to make it a little bit easier. I'm not sure what just happened there. Oh, anyway, the other thing that you can do, if you want to, well, let's cancel this. Let's go choose this audio zone now. Let me get out of these settings first. Sorry, I'm clicking around. I'll run through this again when we do the Windows side as well, but there we go. You can, if you want to, you can choose an icon that you like if your device is not one that Roon already recognized. If you didn't specify it there, you can put it as a pipe wrench or something. I don't know. You can choose whatever you want to. You'll notice I'm pretty vocal in the channel about recommending volume leveling. I think by default it's off. I would not use auto or track unless you know what you're doing. I would strongly recommend album. You can use the default target. Sometimes I use one that's a little bit lower than that, depending on if it's a speakers or headphone system. But I would recommend setting those parameters. But apart from that, now that we've selected this guy, we should be able to play some things. So I can pick a nice relaxing album like this one and press play. And I will be able to look at my signal path and see that it's doing the volume correction. For this output, since I've got headphones, or I'm planning to connect headphones, I've turned on the crossfeed DSP. You can ignore that for now. That's for another talk. But the important thing we want to see is this little, slider showing that it's making progress with playback. I'm going to make sure that there's something in the signal path, that the Raspberry Pi name that we specified when we did Diet Pi setup shows up here, and that we have audio playing. All right, so I've run through a ton of things. Let me see what we're seeing. Antonio says that his is not showing up. Antonio, make sure that you have a DAC connected. I'll show you a troubleshooting trick that we can do to kind of see what's going on and make sure that your DAC is connected. Is anybody besides Neil gotten to the point that I have where we're able to see this stuff in Roon? And don't worry if you weren't able to follow along because your DAC's not showing up in Roon, or that your device is not showing up in Roon. I'll run through all that stuff again. All right, let me run through kind of a troubleshooting thing that I sometimes find to be helpful. Let me jump back to the configure stage here. All right, Jose, he sees it. All right, man. I'm very happy for you. All right. This is going to sound a little bit nerdy. If you need to know the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. So if you're Antonio, if you're still not able to find it, you can later on experiment with that Fing tool to try to find your Raspberry Pi on their network. You need to know what the IP address is to do this next step and do some troubleshooting. But you can do SSH root at, and then whatever the IP address of your Raspberry Pi is. I think mine was 29 or something like that. Shoot. Don't pay any attention to this. Darn it. I can't type now. I've got to delete this line because I connected to it before and it doesn't know that. All right. The password for this thing is dietpi, D-I-E-T-P-I, all lowercase. This lets us log into things. It's going to just let us accept the license, and then we can see that we've got a command line on our dietpi. Don't be too intimidated by this, but it is pretty helpful. It gives you some commands that you can use to kind of explore things. You can get help and that kind of stuff. What we're going to do, though, is type aplay-l, A-P-L-A-Y-L. And when you do that, you should see a DAC connected. In this case, I've got this Hi-Fi DAC connected. If you don't see anything when you type aplay-l, or you don't see your DAC, then something's not quite right. I have seen in some cases that people have DACs, like an older benchmark DAC or some of these other DACs that by default are configured with USB audio class 1. And Linux will not recognize a USB audio class 1 device. It only recognizes USB audio class 2. I'm not sure why, but I've seen this problem before. So you have to go into the settings of your DAC, or maybe there's a little switch on the back, or look in your manual and see. You have to configure your DAC to be USB audio class 2, not USB audio class 1. And then Linux will see it. The other thing that you have to do is make sure that your DAC is powered on. If your DAC has a power cord or a power switch, make sure that it's connected and powered on when you, make sure that it's powered on when you connect it to the Raspberry Pi so that it can find it. What are some other troubleshooting things that I found with DACs? Try a different USB cable, maybe. Unlikely that you have a bad one, but it could be there's something weird going on there. I know some audiophile USB cables only have the signal cables connected and not the power cables connected, and that might prevent the Raspberry Pi from seeing it. Try a different DAC if you have another DAC that you could try. They're kind of different troubleshooting type of approaches. But and we can I can take questions offline, or we can go through this one-on-one if you've got some specific troubleshooting scenarios. But I show this as a little bit of a bonus. You can log into these things and do a little bit of troubleshooting. There's another, I'll show you since I'm in here as well. It's not necessary to do this, but every once in a while, like after a few months, you can log in and type dietpi update, and it'll check to see if there are any updates necessary. I would only do this if you feel like you have a reason to, or if you're concerned about security stuff on your home network, or if you're OCD and everything on your home network has to be up to date all the time. Otherwise, I would not bother with this. But there's a whole bunch of dietpi commands that you can run. I just type dietpi dash and then hit tab a couple of times, and it gives you a list of all these things. And so if you're the inquisitive type, a DIYer, and you have to know everything about everything that you play with, explore that. If you are not, don't do any of this stuff. Just pretend like you never saw this. The only command that's useful is that aplay-l to help you kind of see what's going on with your DAC and make sure that everything's good. All right. I see that Neil was able to connect with his. We've got a few folks that are happy. Antonio, we'll take this stuff offline if we need to kind of slog through stuff. Anybody else have a specific question before I move on? We have lovely music still playing in the background here. It's quite nice. One of the things I like to do, go into focus, format, DSD 256. Maybe I can play a little DSD 256 to this thing and see if it falls apart. I don't have headphones connected, but oh wait, this is not DSD 256. Why did it say DSD 256? Lied to me. Let me try this one. There we go. There, my little 7th generation knockdown stairs is straining under the weight of sending DSD 256 out to this thing, but barely keeping up at 2.2x speed. It's doing volume leveling and cross-feed processing. Those both are pretty. That DSP is pretty expensive. So I think my computer is not able to keep up with this. I don't think it's a problem with a Raspberry Pi, or it might be because my Wi-Fi is so crappy up here. So you can kind of push this stuff to the limit if you want to. If you don't have good enough Wi-Fi coverage in an environment where you need to be able to play these things and you're getting these kinds of errors, you can go into Roon's DSP settings, and under sample rate conversion, you can customize that and set it to something sane, like maybe we want to just convert it to DSD64. And then if we do that, take a look at our signal path again. Now I'm doing this delta sigma modulator. Looks like I'm still falling apart here. So I think my Wi-Fi signal up here in the loft is just not good enough. If I do this at any kind of normal place in my house where I've got reasonable Wi-Fi, it works well. So Just showing this, I'm kind of doing this as an intentional worst case. If you experience some of these problems, you might have to do to check and see if you've got a good enough Wi-Fi signal. There are some Wi-Fi analyzer tools you can use. It could be that you're on a Wi-Fi channel that a lot of your neighbors are using as well, and so that interference makes this stuff harder to work. But these are things that you might have to experience. And this is why, one of many reasons why I encourage people to use a wired connection whenever you possibly can. If I switch to kind of normal track, all right, cool. Are you able, Antonio? Go ahead and try doing that SSH trick that I showed you. If you can, in the Eero app, if you're able to see the IP address. I don't know what the Eero app is, to be perfectly honest. I guess I could Google that. All right, so if you've got the IP address in your mesh network hardware, then you'd be able to again, let me get rid of all this stuff. SSH root at whatever IP address your Eero app is telling you. Don't put that the one that I typed in, but type whatever address the Eero app is telling you. I'm gonna do mine. I don't know. Oh yeah, it let me log in without a password, but that's because I'm using SSH muxing and I'm complicated. But you would normally have to type in a password at that point. The password's just diet pi on all lowercase, and then aplay-l to see if it's detecting your DAC, and if it's not, you got to try to figure out why your DAC is not being seen. Again, the DAC has to be physically connected with that USB cable and all that stuff, and powered on, or the Raspberry Pi is just not going to see it. All right, where are we? Looking to see Jose. It seems very happy. I love seeing it when people are happy. I also like people when they're having problems to let me know, give us an opportunity to try to help where we can. As you can imagine, troubleshooting people's setups from across the world and across the internet without being able to see or hear anything that you're doing is challenging. But again, we can take this offline if there are specific things that we can help so that you can get this going. I do want everybody who's sufficiently motivated to be successful here, and so I'm happy to help out as much as I can, either now or offline. But if you're able to get to the place where I am, where you have pretty music playing, give me a thumbs up or something. I think I've heard from a number of folks already. What is the signal path for this thing? Yeah, this is just straight up. I wish I had my headphones plugged in. This is, I understand, a pretty nice sounding little album. But at any rate, you should be in pretty good shape. I will move on to the Windows side of things here in just a bit, if there are no questions in the next 30 seconds. Yeah, so it's SSH root at whatever the address is, and then the password is diet pi in all lowercase. There's a diet pi configure thing that you could do if you want to change their passwords or do other things. Jose is saying, could you do this with the Allo US bridge? Yes, you can. I have done it with mine. The Allo image is fine. It has a little web GUI to configure things, kind of like Ropi does, or however you pronounce Ropi. But I prefer to turn all that stuff off. I only want my Raspberry Pi doing music-y things. Oh, I should show you that. I only want my Raspberry Pi doing music-y things. I don't want it bogged down with web servers and other stuff. So when I got my Allo US bridge and my US bridge signature, I reflashed them with diet pi using the same method that I'm showing you today. And I think I've convinced myself that it sounds better, whether it does or not. It's immaterial to you, but I happen to like it. Let me go back to here. I wanted to show you what's running on this thing. So if I log back into this thing again, there's a command that diet pi comes with called htop. and it's pretty. It shows you all the different tasks that are running on the Raspberry Pi. It's very sort of computer nerdy. You probably remember me using this image as the background for this event when I initially posted about it a couple of weeks ago or so. It's telling us that that the CPU usage is very, very, very low. You can see the 4 different cores, the 0 through 3 on the left, and the average, those meters are kind of in the 1% to 2% range. This is what we want to see. We want to see very low CPU usage. And the CPU usage is arguably higher since I've logged in. We can see that we've got Roon Bridge and all of its sub-processes running. Because I'm logged in through SSH, we've got this drop bear thing and running htop. If I'm not logged in, none of these processes exist. If I'm not logged in, there are only about 15 or 16, maybe 17 tasks running in the background. Diet Pi, as the name implies, is very lightweight, very thin, keeps things as simple as possible, and it basically allows Roon Bridge to be the only kind of process of any consequence that's running on the Raspberry Pi. We do leave an SSH server running in the background just so that you could log in if you needed to for some reason, but generally speaking, we want the image to be as lean as possible. If you were to log into Allo's Diet Pi kind of implementation, they've got a different password than this, I think. I'm trying to remember what it is, but you can look and see. You're able, actually, straight from Allo, you can log into their network devices as well, but you'll find a whole bunch more processes and tasks running when you're on htop. Yeah, Neil, I know this is nerdy. Sorry, I can't help myself. But I know that we have DIYers of all kinds of different levels. If all this stuff went over your head, you can safely ignore it. But I'm just mentioning it for the people who are curious about things. A lot of us tend to be on the curious side in addition to being audiophiles or Roon enthusiasts. So thanks for bearing with me on that. All right, so let's go and do the Windows side of this thing. We're kind of running into I'm supposed to end this thing at 4 o'clock, and so I don't want to keep you longer than promised. I still have music playing. We'll let that continue to kind of marinate, I guess, while we switch over to the Windows side of things. So Windows, here we go. All right, on Windows, like I said, the first thing you're going to want to do is download Strawberry Pi. If you haven't done this already, you're going to need to do that. Not Strawberry Pi. I have Pi on my brain. I think I mentioned this before. I'm on Pi is not on my current diet right now, so I think about it a lot. Strawberry Pearl. So we click Strawberry Pearl. I don't want to put it on my SD card. I'm going to put it in downloads or desktop or whatever. Let's do it on desktop. So we'll download Strawberry Pearl. I'm going to open it. And let me get out of this thing. Standard. It's going to tell me that I've already got it installed. I'm just going to do a repair because it's pretty similar to doing an install. If you already have it installed, don't have it installed, then it'll be going through the install flow. Hopefully it's not responding, but maybe that's okay. I should have insufficient sacrifice to the demo gods. I should have probably tried this first. Close the program. Let me do uninstall. Where is this thing? Strawberry Pearl. I'm being very brave right now, and I'm going to regret this later probably, but here we go. We'll do this while you guys are getting Strawberry Pearl downloaded if you haven't already on the Windows side. Strawberry Pearl is kind of it doesn't require a ton of disk space, but it has a lot of files. Perl's a Perl interpreter, but it comes with a whole bunch of libraries and documentation files. And in computers, if we have a large number of files, it doesn't really matter how big they are. A large number of files just takes a lot of work to deal with. It's a lot of extra overhead to organize a whole bunch of files than it is 1 or 2 giant files. I know I'm getting nerdy again, but just giving you an explanation of what we're seeing. Time remaining is 0 seconds, so that's very encouraging. But now it's gone up a bit. It's on my system. It's going through and cleaning up many thousands of little files. David, has anybody got questions in the comments while I'm waiting? And all right, just it's very nerdy. It's David's telling me that I'm being nerdy. Neil's telling me that I'm being very nerdy. Sorry. Fair. All right. You can't hear what David says, and I'm actually happy about that at this point. But I've got him playing in my head. 18 seconds. Do 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 do. All right, I've successfully undone that. Now let's see if I can install it. It didn't ask me to reboot, so that's good. Accept the terms of the license. Install in the default location. Yes. Making sure that my download is not messed up. Anyway, this was technically part of the homework, but David mentioned that some people were not sure about how this works, so I felt like I should run through it again. Takes a while. Okay, that's fine. All right, and then I don't want to read the README file. I'm happy there. All right, cool. Let's run through this really quickly on the Windows side. The first thing that we're going to want to do is SD card. So I'm going to bring up the SD card. I just tapped the Windows key and typed SD card to get this thing. If you've got an icon on your desktop, you can use that, whatever. I've already formatted this card. It's on my eDrive. I want you to pay attention to what this select card thing is here for two reasons on Windows. One, because you don't want to format the wrong card. There's some protection in the software to keep you from wiping out your operating system disk that hopefully works. But if you've got more than one thumb drive or card in your system, I don't want you to blow away your wedding pictures or your Christmas pictures or your entire music library or whatever else. So pay a lot of attention to this and make sure that you're convinced that it's the right one. In this case, I know that I've got a 16 gig card in there. It's showing that it's 14.84 gigabytes for lots of boring math reasons. I'm going to make a note of this drive letter. In my case, it's E. In your case, it might be D or F or G or something else. If you need to write down what that letter is, you're going to need to use that letter later. So don't forget what that drive letter is. I'm going to do a quick format, and I'm going to say none here again. If I'd used this card before, the volume label might say something different. But since I haven't, I'm just going to do a quick format. And then we can see that formatted, and it's done. So I can quit out of this thing. Now we're going to do the flash. So you should have that .py image downloaded already. I've got it in this folder here, .py, Buster, whatever. If you just have the 7z file, you'll need to make sure that you have that 7-zip software that I talked to you about installed, and then you can unpack it from there. Let me see if I can find. Did I keep that download? Let me download it again real quick, just in case there are questions about how to unpack this thing. .py.com, download, Raspberry Pi, download. I'll download to my desktop. All right, show in folder. So if you have on my desktop, yeah, there it is. This is that 7-zip file, 7z. I don't know why somehow I've got my thing set up so that it's really, really wide, but if I scroll over, I can see it's a 7z file. If you've got the 7-zip software installed, then you can right click on it and you get this 7-zip menu, and you can say extract files, and that will let you extract all the files. It's going to ask me where I want to put them. I guess I'll just overwrite what I have. It's fine. And maybe it'll ask me. I'm going to say yes to all. You shouldn't have to worry about that. So that's how you unpack the file so that it's in a format that Etcher can find. So I'm going to select the image. It's on my desktop in that folder. There's the image. I'm going to choose that. SD card is my 16 gigabyte card here. And the number for the size is a little bit different from SD card formatter. You can ask me later on why those numbers are like that. I'm going to check my settings real quick, make sure that everything is off except for auto updates enabled. I encourage you to do the same. Just click that gear up there, make sure that everything is grayed out except for auto updates. You could even gray that out if you wanted to, but I don't know, it's probably okay to leave it there. And then we click flash, and then this should blow up on my system. I hope so that I can show you what to do. Come on, blow up. Yes, there we go. It says, looks like it failed, and I've got this Acronis active protection window popping up. It's mad at me. So you may have a different antivirus thing or anti-malware software install. I'm going to show you how I fix mine. If you run into this situation, you can do something similar. You'll have to look at the documentation for your anti-malware software to find out what you do. I've got this active protection enabled, and I can whitelist processes that are allowed to access this card. To find out where Etcher is, I've got a desktop shortcut for it here. I'm going to get the properties, and I'm going to copy this target path here. So this long data local programs blah 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 blah. This is where this thing exists. I'm going to use that so that I can tell my software where this program is. And now I'll quit out of Etcher, and I got to wait for this little spinny thing to finish so that it's taken the malware update fix. And we'll start Etcher again, go through the image selection process again. SD card looks good, settings look good, and I'll flash. And now it should work okay. David, I'll let you answer next question. I'm not sure. I think he was looking for like a DLNA option as well, and things like that exist, but that's for another talk. It is possible to configure your Diet Pi to accept more than just Roon streams, but since we're all Roon enthusiasts, I assume that we would never want to use anything other than Roon while we're at home anyway. So I'm not going to go into that in much detail in this talk. I'm being a little facetious or a little silly, but for right now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep this Roon focused. You can do anything with these Raspberry Pis you want to, or that you're inclined to write software or configure software to do. So it's not limited to Roon, but I'm going to stay very kind of Roon focused here. All right, so that card is flashed and ready to go. And hang on a second. I'm going to need... I was going to run downstairs and get that card, but I think it's probably faster for me to just flash another one up here in the background while you guys are catching up and asking questions and that kind of thing. So just talk amongst yourselves. I think it's about as much time for me to go downstairs as it is to get that card out of my Windows machine as it is to flash another one. Oh yeah, so it should be installed as part of the ALSA utils. If it's not, I don't know. My etcher is not working. I may have to go downstairs and get this. I don't. Oh, there it goes. There it goes. All right, cool. We're good. Just give me a minute to run through things. Yeah, so that a play command line should be on your .py image already. If it's not, I'm not sure what to say. You won't be able to run that aplay command on your main computer or the computer that you use for flashing the card. It's something that you have to SSH into your Raspberry Pi to run. So if you're getting like a command not found, or it doesn't know what to do with aplay when you type that command in your terminal window, it could be that you're not logged into your Raspberry Pi when you're doing that. Otherwise, since I specified that number 5 in the installation process, that told .py when it booted up the first time to install that aplay command line. That's why that was there. So if you're on the right machine, if you're logged into your Pi, then it should work okay. All right, cool. I have a freshly baked SD card. So let me go back and shove this SD card in. I'm going to rewind to kind of this process here. I already have my Raspberry Pi 4 kind of already installed or configured. I'm going to unplug this stuff and get it out of the way so we can switch gears. This is my Raspberry Pi 4. I've put it in a little Kodi case. I did it just to kind of help sponsor the Kodi Foundation since I happen to like what they do. It assembles pretty similar to the other one. It's got 4 little screws that hold it into the case, and then there's this metal post that comes down from the top half of the clamshell that presses with some thermal paste onto the CPU, GPU chip on the Raspberry Pi 4 to help keep it cool, and then the whole case acts like a heatsink. You can see there are a couple of USB-C ports and USB 3 ports, the blue ones, and then the black USB 2. And then we've got our Ethernet port. And then the SD card goes in on the other side. Same way, the orientation is the same. So I'm holding it upside down, and I'm taking the SD card and I'm shoving it in so that the little gold pins are facing the green motherboard. Somebody asked on the channel why Raspberry Pi boards aren't red instead of green, but I think PCB boards for computers are pretty much all green unless you pay extra money, and Raspberry Pi is trying to keeps the cost down as low as possible, so that's probably why they chose that color. I have no idea, but that's my guess. All right, cool. So that is connected. We need to get, in order to get this thing to boot, the first thing that we're going to need is a network cable, since I said we're going to do a network boot for this one. So plug in my network cable there. I'm going to try to set it like that. It's not going to want to go that way, but I'm going to try to make it. The next thing I'm going to want to do is connect an HDMI cable so that we can all see what's going on. I have one. The Raspberry Pi 4 has 2 HDMI ports instead of 1, and they're little baby ones. So you have to have a HDMI cable with a little baby connector. And there's 2, so that leads some confusion as to which one you should connect. I found that the one closest to where the power inlet is the correct one, so I'm going to plug in the baby HDMI cable there. Very small. There we go. And then I'll connect the other one to the kind of monitor that I'm letting you guys use. I'm hoping that it'll sync up. We'll find out. I just dropped my mouse. There we go. Mouse. Come here, mouse. All right, and then we're going to need power for this guy. For power, there's been some power issues with the Raspberry Pi, that not being compatible with certain power adapters. I went out and bought the official Raspberry Pi power adapter. I think that's what I recommended in your kit as well, just to be safe. I'm going to plug it into, and I've got a little kind of click on switch here. I'm going to plug that into the Raspberry Pi. We have power, and then I've got the little, yeah. Oh, sorry, say again? No. Yeah, fair. That's a good point. I should probably do that first. This would be. I would have figured that out eventually. David just pointed out that I haven't run DietPi setup yet. Good grief! I've been frazzled by my lack of SD card preparation. Hang on, let's do that real quick. Thank you, David, for keeping me honest here. So I'm going to download the DietPi setup script. I'm in the SD card directory, Perl DietPi setup, we'll call it Roon RPI4B. I think it's a Raspberry Pi 4B. I'm going to say no, I don't have a Raspberry Pi or a Wi-Fi network. These are the configuration parameters that it's writing. You notice that it didn't put any Wi-Fi stuff in there. It's only just set up like the time zone and the host name and stuff like that. I'm going to go to Finder, go to where it says under Locations, the boot, click the little arrow with the line under it to eject it. And now I will try putting it in there. David just saved us all a fair bit of time with me not realizing that that I had not configured the card first. If I hadn't, this thing still would have come up on the network okay, and we could have logged in and manually installed the software, but it's nicer to do it this way. This way, when it boots up, it's going to have the software already installed. So if you're following along at home and you mess that up, know that you've got options, or you can just simply reflash the card and start over. All right, so moment of truth. I'm going to go click the power button on this thing and see if it will show up for us. All right. How are we doing on time? 3:42. Questions in the channel, anybody? All right, good. I noticed that my Mac complained that I didn't eject the card right, although I'm pretty sure that I did. So if this goes horribly wrong, then I get to show you reflashing the card. maybe I was a little bit too quick. Yeah. So the DietPi setup does not configure the IP address at all. The only thing that it does is enable DHCP, and then it allows your network to, it has your network configure an IP address. So your router on your home network, for example, is what should be assigning an IP address to this thing, rather than DietPi. DietPi doesn't put any specific address in there. You might have noticed that in the comments there's an IP address that's set, but it shouldn't be. I'm seeing some weird messages online, so I'm thinking that it's probably... Oh, maybe it's going to be okay. All right, Jose, thanks for joining. Appreciate your participation. I'm glad that it worked. Tim, it's weird. We'll take a look at this and we'll find out what happens with mine. But I know that in the DietPi config file there is an IP address listed, but it should be commented out. If you see that little hash mark in front of a line in the config file, that means that that line is not active. So it's that line should not have had any impact. But let's chat offline if you're still having... Well, it sounds like you've solved the problem by editing it yourself, but I'm a little puzzled to know why that was necessary anyway. All right, so Raspberry Pi 4 is... It looks like it's making progress. I'm looking at what you're seeing, but it's on the other side of the room. I put my laptop on the other side of the room because the fans really get going when it's trying to do all this video encoding and streaming for you fine folks, and it that fan noise tends to make it into my microphone. So it probably still is, but it's minimized by me having it on the other side of the room. It looks like it's doing its updates now. With any luck, it will come up and have the configuration that I specified. We'll find out here in a bit. Yeah, for Mac guys, if you are set up and running, you're welcome to stick around. This process is not going to be significantly different, but I definitely appreciate you taking the time to join and go through all this stuff. I hope it's been helpful. I hope that you've got a new enjoyable Roon output in your house. And I hope that you'll take this knowledge and share it with other folks, help other people get up to speed with this stuff. You can buy commercial products that do the same thing, and I have personally. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think this is a fun way if you've already got a lot of very nice outputs to add maybe a system to the office or the bedroom or the family room. I've got a little Raspberry Pi with a Hi-Fi Berry DAC hat on top of it that we use every day in our family room. It sounds great. I've got another one with an amplifier hat on top that drives a pair of passive PSB speakers. So it's yeah, I see. All right, so all right, I think mine might be, I'm sorry, I got distracted a little bit looking at some questions. The default dietpie.txt file that you get should have any kind of static IP address commented out, so I'm kind of surprised that anybody's found one with it, that Tim found one with it not commented out, not disabled. We will find out very soon what happens with my Pi, my second one. I think it's doing its second boot now, so we'll find out what happens. It looks like mine's going to come up anyway, and then if for some reason it doesn't have Roon installed, I can show you how to do that manually. I might have pulled my card out, not ejected properly. Or maybe my Mac was just being weird. It usually takes a while. There's like 60 retries for this process. All right, it looks like it came up anyway, so let me do a quick login and see what I see. I think I call this, I memorized this IP address, just, oh no. It's not going to be it. That's the Wi-Fi one. Let me do, I think it's 200 maybe, if I remember right. Or, I don't know, can anybody see what that says on the screen? Actually, I think I can, wait, no, that's right. David, can you see what the IP address is? It's really small. 8.220. $220, that's right. I just didn't remember right. Okay, cool. All right. It says there's no sound cards listed because I haven't detected one. I haven't connected one yet. We have Roon Bridge installed, so it looks like it installed the software anyway. Let's get a DAC for this thing. For this one, I've got this giant NAD thing here. It's kind of an amplifier and DAC all in one. I'm just dragging it up here to do something a little bit different. I'll plug a USB cable into the back of it. And this one happens to be a MQA encoder and renderer. Not that that matters, but it's got a power switch on the top that I've connected. So wait for it to wake up. If this doesn't wake up, then I will connect the other one. And make sure that I've got it set to the right input. Looks like I do. Let me try the other sound card since this is being weird. Nope, no insufficient sacrifice to the demo gods again. All right. Turn my little DAC on. Connect it. That's not so good. Oh, you can't. I just realized you can't see what I'm doing. Well, that's okay. I'm gonna reboot this thing and see if that makes it detect the card. All right, since you couldn't see what I was typing, I just was typing aplay-l a bunch. And I wasn't seeing any DAC, so I just typed reboot to reboot it, and we're waiting for it to come back up now. It's good that you're seeing some fun troubleshooting things though, just in case something like this should happen. All right, rebooting it seemed to be helpful. I'm not sure why it didn't detect it. Usually these things are pretty good about that, but it kind of depends on the DAC and the hardware. Now it sees a DAC attached. So this troubleshooting tip is pretty useful. All right, so let's go. I'm not going to do anything weird. Let's go to, I should switch back again. Sorry, I'm not good at mice. I did aplay-l over here after I logged back in, and now I see that the DAC is there. So now we can go back to Roon and enable it. It's going to be the same process that we did before. And you can see I get this select audio zone. That's what Roon says when it can't find one, or whichever one you were using disappeared. Let me go to settings, audio. David told me that the IP address for this was 220, so it should be in here someplace. There's Roon RPI4B. That's the name that I gave it. So let's enable that puppy. I've already kind of done this once before, so you can see the settings are pretty similar, so I don't need to worry about that. Let's go select this guy and play some music. Try to anyway. Yeah. So there we go. We're playing this to Roon RPI4B. So if I had headphone jacks in this thing, I'd be able to hear music. All right, so we did a flash on Windows. We did a flash on Mac OS. We had problems. We solved problems. Everybody's happy. Tim is going to get a drink. I feel like that's probably a good strategy if things aren't working the way you'd hope. So that's good. Any Windows users out there that had any problems with the Windows stuff that I ran through really quickly, please comment. Another thing that I can do that's kind of fun is go back to my, not settings, go back to my albums, focus, and formats. Let's find the DSD-256 thing again. I like this. I'm gonna play this this DSD album again. DSD-256. If you're like me, you don't have a huge number of these. Maybe some people have a bunch. You've done a bunch of SACD rips, but not me. So DSD-256. Remember before when we were playing it over the Wi-Fi connection that's crappy up in my loft, it was coughing along. I would not expect to see the same problem here. If I do, it's probably because my core can't keep up because I'm just barely hanging on. You really want processing speed to stay above 2x, 2.5x kind of thing. If you start dipping at 2x or below, then you're kind of on the ragged edge of this not working. And so we could see. I can go into DSP settings and turn off my crossfeed filter. And that might make my little computer downstairs slightly happier, and now it's able to hum along at 2.2 or 2.3x. But the reality is just that playing DSD 256, even if you're not upsampling to DSD, takes a fair bit of work. But this is work that that Core is doing that your Raspberry Pi endpoint doesn't. All your Raspberry Pi been talking too long. All your Raspberry Pi endpoint has to do is just copy these bits over. If I go back and log into the thing, we'll take a look at how busy this thing is. You notice that it shows really busy when I first type this, but if you look at how busy each of the cores is, it's kind of, there's one core that's at 2 or 3%, and the other ones are mostly at 0. So it's running at a very, very low CPU usage, which is what we want to make sure that things stay sounding nice. I remember somebody posted in the channel about a different Raspberry Pi OS that is specifically optimized for Raspberry Pi 4 over a wired connection. I haven't tried that yet. If I do, I might do a quick live stream on how that sounds and how that works compared to Diet Pi, since I'm slightly interested in that. But, that's obviously way outside of the scope of this. This is kind of all that I had in mind to show you guys today. Ryan says I should slow down. Yeah, I tend to rush a little bit, but I've gotten a little bit closer to the end of my time here anyways. Focus what? I don't know what Neil's asking. Everybody's telling me to slow down. Where did I lose anybody if I was going too fast? We're good? We're good? All right. All right, let me switch back to the end, kind of this end screen. Yeah, I think we're pretty much done. I have audio playing. It hasn't flipped out on me. I had the wrong screen up, but it hasn't flipped out on me, so I feel like it's working. Hey, I really appreciate everybody doing all this stuff along with me. I realize it's next to impossible to try to follow along with somebody on the screen. I know that there are a lot of YouTube videos, tutorials on how to do this kind of stuff. I've created a couple of myself in the past. This is the first one I've attempted to do with other people kind of tracking alongside of me from their own home locations. I think that doing this live maybe is a little bit more helpful. I like that you can ask questions and we can interact kind of a little bit. But if you're going to run through this later on, we can we can take some questions offline. Yes, Tim, it does. So since we're modifying, our script is modifying that Diet Pi config with that 5,121, those two different program numbers. That's what tells Diet Pi first boot process to go and update itself and then install those two applications. If you didn't use the script to configure Diet Pi and you didn't make those manual edits to dietpi.txt, then you'd have to run dietpi-software and go in and manually select those things and install them. But the script automates that process. So once the Raspberry Pi finishes its kind of second boot and comes up live on your network, it should have Roon Bridge and the ALSA stuff pre-installed and ready to go. All right, everybody, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for your time and attention. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you for the next one. All right, cheers.